To anyone who's currently online, I'm just going to wait for a few more people than that before I get started. So just bear with me for a second. Hi, Mike. How are you? I'm just going to wait for some more people to join, and then we can get started. So I see we've got a couple of people on at the moment. I'm just going to give it a little bit more time before I get started with my live session. I'll probably give it to about the 4th minute mark, and then I'll get started. And thanks to those who have joined so far. All right, so I'll probably get started in the next 30 seconds, and then just give a bit of a background about what we're going to do today and moving forward. Just give a little bit more time for people to notice the notification, which I've checked on my LinkedIn and it seems to be popping up, which is really good. All right, I might get started. So thanks to those who have joined and for those who will watch moving forward. So basically what this whole process is going to be about for me is sharing some good content around insolvency, restructuring, voidable transactions, forensic accounting, the areas that I really enjoy working in. But I'm going to do it with a little bit of a twist. So over the next many months, we will be rolling out a series of Tuesday lunchtime interviews of people. Hi Joanne. Basically, what I'm going to be doing is interviewing quite a few titans of the industry or the profession. So people that are very well known to the insolvency profession at large, and just get a bit of an insight for them on where they think things are going, and some, I guess, ideas for reform for the government and that. We've got a lot of content to cover over the next 3 or 4 months from some of these people. Some of them are incredible people who have done incredible things for the profession, and I'm so grateful that they've decided to put their hands up and be part of all this. So I'll release some more information about that on my LinkedIn soon. As people know, I love to post on LinkedIn and provide as much free content as I possibly can. These guys have agreed to come on board and help me, really push and help drive that. So I'm very grateful to them. And I look forward to hopefully starting to roll that out over the next couple of weeks. So today is really just a bit of a tester. I didn't actually advertise this at all on purpose because I really just wanted to test this out. But I do actually have some content that I did want to go through because there's a really important case being handed down on Thursday or being adjudicated on by the full federal court on Thursday. But before I go there, just some background information around myself and the firm. So I'm Matt Hudson, Associate Director here at SV Partners. We do all things insolvency and forensic accounting. we try to help businesses to turn themselves around, keep employees employed, get the best return possible for creditors. We have been doing this for over 20 years as a firm, and many of our partners have been doing it for 30 or 40. We're very much everyone's partner here, trying to help grow business and help those who unfortunately are facing some difficult financial troubles. So a lot of what we do in the firm, we're going to be talking about over the next few months from some of these leading professionals. Not all of whom are going to be from SV Partners. Many are from our academics, they're lawyers, they're QCs, they're members of senior. They're in senior positions at regulatory bodies and stuff like that. So there's a lot to talk about there. What I need to basically be doing here is I've got a screen on my right. It will prompt me whenever someone has a question or wants to make a comment or anything like that. So please feel free to at any time leave me a comment, or if you don't want to make it private, just send me a private message and I'll endeavour to answer it as I'm live or separately. What I wanted to talk about today is this idea of set-off. Okay, so on Thursday, the full federal court is hearing arguments from, I believe, very senior counsel on both sides around whether or not set-off under Section 553C of the Corporations Act can apply to unfair preferences and, I guess, more broadly, voidable transactions. So for those of you who don't know much about unfair preferences and voidable transactions, what I would suggest is, we've got so much content online around what all the definitions and that are. So certainly go and have a read of that and understand those parts. But what I would just quickly say is that an unfair preference is effectively when you've received money as a creditor from a company that eventually goes into liquidation. And that money you received was in preference or priority over others. So you receive more money than if that company had just been liquidated at that moment. Okay, so you receive all this money. If the company had been liquidated at that time, you would have probably have received less. Okay, so therefore you're described as having an unfair preference or a priority or an advantage over others. Okay, so it's a very powerful tool for a liquidator. They can look back 6 months. So from the date of liquidation, they can look back 6 months and determine have there been any transactions during that time that could fit that mold of an unfair preference. And if they do, they have all manner of rights to potentially pursue you. Now, it's not a lay down misère or it's not a super easy claim for a liquidator to run. The liquidator has to prove up a lot of things, and there are also a lot of potential defences available for creditors. But the one that I want to talk about quickly today is this idea of set-off. Okay, so set-off has been used as a defence against unfair preferences for quite a number of years now. Prior to that, it never was. It was a very big issue back in the day when the first decision was handed down, called Morton v. Rexall Electrical, which was a Queensland District Court case. And in that case, the judge effectively said that Section 553C of the Corporations Act, which is the provision around set-off, could be used to set off whatever the creditor owes on the date of the appointment of a liquidator against the liquidator's claim. Okay, so if I put this in some numbers for you, so say you receive 10 grand a week before a company goes into liquidation. Okay, but at the time by the time the company goes into liquidation, you're still owed 20, 30 grand by this company, and it's quite disappointing for you that you've lost all this money. But at least you got the 10 grand. Now, a liquidator might turn around and say, well, that 10 grand you got was the only 10 grand in the bank account. Okay, so you've received all this money that would never have been paid to you if a liquidator was appointed at that time. Now, what the set-off potentially allows is for you to say, no, liquidator, I refuse to pay that money because I'm still owed all this money. Okay, so you can offset the 10 grand from the 40 grand that you're owed on appointment. Okay, so you would say to the liquidator, no, instead I'll submit what's called a proof of debt in the liquidation for only 30 grand then instead. I'm not paying back the 10 grand. Instead I'm setting that off. Now, that does not work in theory. Okay, now this is what a lot of people in the insolvency world do not agree with. Okay, so they say that is incorrect because set off under the Corporations Act requires so many different things. Okay, so set off requires a mutuality of existence between the relevant parties. So how can you possibly say that there is mutuality between a liquidator's claim, which can only arise under a liquidator, and a debt that was owed to a creditor prior to a liquidator ever being appointed? Okay, so there doesn't seem to be this sort of causal connection between the two. So people immediately were like, well, this just doesn't seem right. Like it just, the arguments for it don't really stack up when you actually look at the requirements under the section. So what we found was that every creditor, every trade creditor, even the ATO now, is running this argument across all preference claims. I guess really because no one's challenged it, so to speak. So what we're seeing though now is that on Thursday, the full federal court will be dealing with this. They'll be looking at is that a good argument? Are there alternative arguments? Should set off be allowed to be applied against unfair preferences? It's a minefield of information and issues that the court's going to have to go through. And Rory Durham, who's a barrister, has written extensive textbooks and papers on exactly this issue. And I'm very grateful to him for all of that work. And if you read his textbooks and his articles on this issue, he very firmly is of the view that it should not apply. I myself have published a number of papers around why I don't think set-off should apply. And I think fundamentally, when you think about the cause of action, so to speak, okay, so what I said earlier, the cause of action is by the liquidator, okay? So this unfair preference claim, okay, it's by the liquidator. No one else has that right, okay? Only the liquidator can run that claim, and they can only run it for a 3-year period unless they've effectively applied to court to extend that period. But it's only by the liquidator. So if you're going to have set off, the set off has to be between the creditor and the company that's in liquidation. And the set off has to be effectively mutual debits and mutual credits between the two of them. So there has to be that sort of relationship. But if it's the liquidator with the claim up here and it has nothing to do with the company, then you've sort of broken this chain, okay? Instead, there's a chain between these two. And fundamentally, that's where I think it falls down, is this idea of it could never create mutuality. Now, there are a lot of other arguments that you could add to that to explain why set-off can't apply, but I'm not going to go through too many of those in too great of a detail. But some of the other issues one other issue that I thought I would quickly raise that I don't think has actually really been talked about at any great length. It's something that I will be posting on separately on my LinkedIn soon, is this understanding of why I think the ATO in particular and very sophisticated trade creditors would also really struggle with applying set-off. So mutuality has a bunch of requirements, okay, and I've gone through a couple of those already, but one of the ones that people don't really spend much time on is this concept of mutuality requires an intention between the parties. Okay, so there must be an intention between the two parties that there be mutuality and this right of set-off. Okay, so if you could argue that the chain is never broken because the liquidator is effectively acting as an agent for the company and the claim is sort of going through this process, okay? If you can take that view of the world, the problem though is that in particular, when it comes to a sophisticated trade creditor and the ATO, their terms and conditions and their legislation actually forbid the other party's right to an intention to set off. So let me explain that. So if I enter into a contract with this sophisticated creditor, 9 times out of 10, their contract will basically say that I, as the customer, have no right to set off against them. Okay. Instead, they have full reciprocal right, full rights. To set off any debt they may owe me, but because they're in a position of bargaining power and position of all forms of power over me as a sole trader, I can't tell them that I don't agree with that term. So 9 times out of 10, people will sign the clause that says, or sign the contract where there's a clause that says the sophisticated trade creditor does not need to set off any debts that it owes me. Now, that's obviously a big difference in bargaining power in that. But what that means for the purposes of set off, when it comes to unfair preferences, is that how can you say that there's an intention of set off or an intention of a right of mutual set off commensurable between the two? You can't, because that contractual term basically says that the company in liquidation or the customer had no right to set off ever. So I think there's a really difficult area there for sophisticated trade creditors to get over. And it's even more prominent when it comes to the ATO. So the ATO's legislation actually requires that the ATO set off its debts. Okay, and the ATO legislation does not allow for a taxpayer to set off its debts with the ATO. So if the ATO owed money to it, there's no reciprocal right for it to just automatically set off debts. That's not how tax works. So the issue that the ATO in particular is going to run in here is that, again, there is no intention of mutuality, no intention of commensurable set-off rights. So it'll be really interesting to see where the federal court goes with some of these arguments and how they deal with these quite difficult concepts of mutuality. And plays around with that. So what I think will happen is that we will have the hearing on Thursday. It will run the day, and it might take their honours, weeks, months potentially to come back, because they're going to be grappling with some very difficult concepts. There's some very senior barristers that are involved here. So yeah, we'll certainly be waiting with bated breath to see what happens. I think it should be really, really interesting. Now, I don't really want to go through too much about set-off and all that because I want to keep some of it for some of my posts and all that. But what I would love to say to everyone is, I would really like to roll these out a lot more regularly. I'm going to bring on some really cool guests that would love to be part of this. So please get on and support these people. We've got so much to talk about, so much to get through that. Yeah, I'm really looking forward. What will happen with these videos and that they'll be put up on LinkedIn, they'll be put up on YouTube. Might be a bit of editing to get rid of some of the start, because we're still trying to play around with what happens with just trying to work out what happens with questioning and me looking at the screen and stuff like that. So please just bear with us. But thanks everyone for tuning in or saying hello to me. I've very much enjoyed this, and hopefully we can have some better sessions and bigger sessions moving forward. And I'll aim for quite a little bit longer than this moving forward. But this is just a nice tester. So thank you everyone for joining in. And if you have any questions, feel free to email, call me, or message me on LinkedIn. All of my details are on there, or on the SV Partners website. So thank you very much. Cheers.